Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Brian Stark. Justice is said to be fair and equal. The due process for the courts is meant to ensure that it is fair and equal. But is it fair and equal? Let's discover the truth right now. The answer on whether the justice system is fair and equal might lie with one of the most influential American political philosophers of the 20th century, John Rawls, and his theory of justice. John Rawls' A Theory of Justice was first published in 1971 and was his greatest work. It looked at justice through the lens of equality and fairness, put simply, which is what we claim our system of justice is. Honestly, though, is justice in America fair and equal to all citizens, all genders, all age groups, all races, and most importantly, to all parties? That is the question. Rawls' theory is built around two fundamental principles of justice. The first principle is equal basic liberties principle, which holds that every individual should have the same rights, basic rights and liberties, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, the right to life, the right to liberty, freedom of thought, access to education, freedom of the press, and most importantly, the right to participate in the political process. This principle is based on the idea that these liberties are essential for human flourishing and that they should be equally available to all members of society. So the first principle is based on the fact that everyone is equal. The Magna Carta, put in the comments if there's any members of society presently that have problems flourishing because these basic rights are not equally applied in society. In my opinion, sadly, no. Are these rights and liberties applied equally to the youth, teens, adolescents? Are they applied equally as they would be, say, adults, police, public servants, political leaders? Or do these adults perceive the young to be dumb, stupid, manipulators, can't be trusted? When a crime happens, police, prosecutors, and judges, and the system as a whole, use their self-interests to blame, manipulate, and can even use their authority and ego to intimidate the youth, to get a confession so the government can win an easy conviction in our criminal judicial process. Detroit's Larry Smith was given $8.5 million for 30 years in prison for first-degree murder in 1994, based on just testimony. No evidence to back the testimony. Detroit's Devontae Stanford, who was convicted of a quadruple murder, 4 murders, at the age of 14 in 2007, did 8 years in prison and exonerated after a professional hitman confessed to the murders, and the city of Detroit gave him, or he was given, $7.5 million. Gary Washington was convicted in 1987 in East Baltimore because the police manipulated a 12-year-old boy to identify Washington as the shooter during a drug dispute. Once again, no evidence was found connecting Washington to the crime. $3.1 million for his 30 years. John Clean and Eduardo Dumbridge, 18 and 15 respectively, were at the Clean family home watching the Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield fight. Remember what happened that night? Mike Tyson got a little hungry and tried to bite off Evander Holyfield's ear. That alibi, although great, was not enough not to have these two convicted of a murder, and they were given $24 million for their 27 years. Las Vegas teen Christine Lovato, at 18 years old, was 3 hours away when a homeless man was murdered in Vegas. But police manipulated and fabricated evidence to win a conviction against Lovato. She was sentenced to 40 to 100 years in prison. She was released in 2017, and it took 7 years after her release, 5 years after filing for compensation, for this to get in front of the court and a jury to reward her $34 million for damages for her 16 years in incarceration. Now, how can these adult prosecutors and judges and police justify robbing these 18-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 25-year-olds, adults from a majority of their life, liberty, and freedom? I can't picture what those people went through, but I can say this. When these crimes happened, I am most positive that in most cases, if not all cases, the government prosecutors, the police, the investigators didn't take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, or even 7 years for the government to arrest, indict, blame, convict, and sentence these individuals. Do they deserve the money? Most definitely. But if you ask any of those individuals, I think that they would rather have those 8 years back, those 30 years back, those 16 years back, rather than the $34 million because of mental health and mental turmoil that they went through. Is the youth the only group that are robbed of these essential rights and liberties, according to John, when a criminal case goes to trial? Are there any parties of all the victims given the same rights and liberties in participating in the entire process? Let's take a look at the victims of the crimes and how their liberties and rights can be robbed and ignored and are not applied equally to them in every case. Sidney Powell's family asked the prosecution not to take Sidney to trial, but to have support from the government, get mental help, community service, and support from the government. Akron prosecutors, nope. Mind you, Sidney killed her mom and her mom's family. Her father and relatives wanted to avoid going to trial, wanted to avoid reliving this traumatic experience. So much for the victim's right to be heard, or the victim's right to participate in every aspect of the trial. In my opinion, the government forced Sidney Powell's father and Sidney Powell's family to testify at trial to relive that traumatic experience. So much for freedom and rights. Apparently, the only time you have the right to be heard and right to participate in our judicial system as victims is when you're on board with how they want to proceed with the case. Carly Gregg, another young girl that killed her mom and her mom's parents. Carly's grandparents are helping her appeal her conviction. I will put a link to a Go Get funding in the description below if you would like to help with Carly's appeal. I'm sure any money that you can provide to help her win this appeal and get released, they would gladly accept. And Carly also attacked her stepfather after killing her mom. And they are trying to get Carly's conviction and sentence overturned. I would put a $1 bet on the family and stepfather felt that they were forced and coerced by the government to testify at Carly's trial and to relive that traumatic day and that traumatic experience. When they knew Carly had some mental problems, she had bipolar, she was schizophrenic, and she was on the wrong medication. Compare those two cases with the 14-year-old Florida teen that killed her grandma. And prosecutors worked with the father, because it was his mom that was murdered by her daughter. The father worked with the prosecutors to get a plea for no contest and was sentenced for up to 3 years in a Florida Department of Juvenile Justice maximum risk commitment program to allow her to get help, be evaluated, but more importantly, so the father would not lose his daughter for a traumatic and tremendous amount of time. Going back to Sydney and Carly, think of that. Sydney didn't take a frying pan over and invaded another neighbor's dwelling, private residence, and brutally murdered the family and claimed insanity. Or Carly didn't take her mom's gun to a neighbor's house and just killed another family and claimed insanity. This wasn't a case of another victim against Sidney Powell, or another family that is demanding justice and punishment against Carly Gregg. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, you can feel free to disagree, but put simply, this was more accurately, it may have been called the state of Ohio versus Sidney Powell and the state of Mississippi against Carly Gregg. This was Carly Gregg's family versus Carly Gregg, or Sidney Powell's family versus Sidney Powell. And note, in both of these cases, in both of these circumstances, the families are trying to help their relative appeal these convictions that the family should see as a favorable result. And they think it's an insult. If the family didn't want to go to trial, why go? Why didn't the prosecutors work with the family to get a plea deal that was agreeable to Sydney and her family, and Carly Gregg and her family? Carly was offered a 40-year plea deal. There was no way that Carly's grandparents or Heath Smiley had any help in constructing or having the input to figure out a plea deal to hold Carly accountable, but also so that they would not lose their daughter. That plea deal was all the prosecutions using their power and ego for their self-interest to get publicity for their office and try to expose how evil, manipulative the teens are. It is the prosecutors that have a say in what plea deal that they will offer, and very rarely the victims have any say in it. But shouldn't that kind of be changed a little bit? Especially when the victims are the family members of the defendant and they don't want to go to trial or they don't want to relive this experience. That was how equal our justice system is. I don't think it's very equal. But what about fairness? The second principle Rawls referred to as the difference principle, which states that social and economic inequalities should be arranged so that they are the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. In other words, inequalities are only justifiable if somehow they benefit the most disadvantaged members of society, not benefit the most advantaged members of society. In his theory of justice, Rawls illustrates inequalities can take many forms, and inequalities can have many causes as well. From the moment we're born, our circumstances such as our family background, race, and social economic status. Or today, even we talk about disabilities, whether it be mental, physical, or psychiatric. Make society unequal or unfair, and can greatly influence opportunities and outcomes. The challenge is how can we create a system of justice that is fair for all citizens, that can account for these inequalities and ensure that everyone has a fair opportunity, from unequal access to education, healthcare, to discriminatory laws and social norms. These inequalities can lead to a serious lack of opportunity, social exclusion, and even poverty. Or maybe that is the goal. Maybe that's the purpose of having a biased, unequal, and unfair judicial system. Rawls' theory of justice offers a framework for thinking about these issues and finding solutions. Are there any other inequalities? Now, I already mentioned to you the cases of Cindy Powell and Carla Gregg. Now, why is their family fighting so hard, have so much support, has so much supporters to try and get this overturned? Perhaps, and this is just my opinion, perhaps maybe that Sidney Powell's family, Sidney Powell's father, Carly Gregg's grandfather, Carly Gregg's grandparents, Heath Smiley, Carly's stepfather, knows Carly, and the Powells know Sidney a little bit better than the state prosecutors and state investigators. And they know, they can say with absolute certainty, Sidney Powell and Carly Gregg would not intentionally hurt someone. Also, medical diagnosis. We saw the case a couple years ago of Mackenzie Shirilla, and that's starting to make highlight about new videos and new arrests. But one of the things that I saw, and I have a couple videos regarding this trial, you could watch those. But one thing I saw is the fact that during her trial, it was noted that she has a form of dysautonomia called POTS syndrome. I have a thing called neurocardiogenic syncope. Now, dysautonomia, I've got a video on dysautonomia and stuff. I'm working on it, and so I'll put a link and click that bell notification for future videos, and you can see a lot what dysautonomia is. Short answer, it's an autonomic, it's a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, where your organ, you don't really have control at times. What about abuse? You know, Ruby Frankie's daughter, has come out with a book. And she has described the relationship of Jody and Ruby Frankie. Now, one thing that I wonder about, what if she did not do that journal? What if she decided, I'm not going to do a journal? What if she just got fed up with Ruby Frankie and fed up with her mom, fed up with Jody Hildebrand, and murdered her? The entire internet world would be all over her and say, I don't care. There is no reason to kill your mom. She's just an evil teen. She should be locked up for the rest of her life. We see a similar case with Sierra Hulseth, who at sentencing, because she killed her father, she murdered him, 70 times stabbed, dismembered him, used his credit card to go get stuff from the store, and just threw him in the trash, burned him, and stole his car with her boyfriend, fled to Salt Lake City, Utah. And she claimed when she was gave her allocution, that she was abused. Her father introduced her to porn. She wouldn't let her go to school. She, coerced her into doing certain things that she was not comfortable with, that she didn't prefer. And of course, the Daniel Hulseth family denies it. Completely denies it. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Sarah is lying. Maybe she wasn't taking accountability. But not long after the sentencing, I saw a video on Facebook. And it showed, I'm guessing Sarah was maybe 6 or 7. I don't know, that's a rough guess. But she was wrapped in a towel, soaking wet hair. Clearly she just got out of the shower. In fact, I believe Daniel in the video said she just got out of the shower. There's a big thing going on about family vlogs, if they're good, if they're bad, if they're, if you should do them. But what kind of a father would exploit and expose his 7 to 8-year-old daughter like that? And when you kind of look further into the case, you see that Daniel was arrested for lewdness acts against Sierra's mom that caused them to get a divorce. Daniel loved social media. He joined YouTube, I believe, in 2011 or 2012, which happens to be right around the time when he was at risk from losing custody of Sierra. Is that a coincidence? Now, with all this information, is it kind of a stretch to think that Sierra and Daniel, he introduced her to porn? Hey, Sierra, this is what beauty looks like. Oh, here, Sierra, do that. oh, you're too young to have an opinion. You know what something like that said to a 16-year-old says? You're too stupid to know what you want. You're too stupid to have an opinion. Now, let's reverse things. Let's say Sarah was telling the truth. And she's not getting listened to. She'll go to the police and say, all right, hey, please, can you intervene here? My father's doing this, my father's doing this. So he goes over to talk to Daniel. I've got so many subscribers and stuff. I wouldn't risk all that for this. All right, that didn't work. Let's go to my grandparents. Surely my father's parents will listen to me. Oh, Sarah, my son would never do something like that. Teens cannot be trusted is the general message that these teens are getting sent. They have no credibility. They can't be trusted. They can't be taken seriously. Some other inequalities are the case of Chloe Driver. Now, she is sentenced to life in prison. I think she has parole after 30 years, but because she killed her 13-month-old daughter. But Chloe Driver was also in a cult. What is the one thing that cult leaders love to do? They love to brainwash, they love to manipulate, and they love to get the individual that's in their group to think and act the way they want them to act. And so, Chloe Driver is doing 30 years to life in prison. The cult leader that brainwashed and manipulated and probably is the main reason why this crime was committed is not doing a single day in jail. Rawls argued that these two principles should be lexical, meaning the first principle should take priority over the second principle, and that the second principle should only come into play once the first principle has been satisfied. Now, is that an example of the American justice system? Put your comments in the comment section below. So basically, what that is saying is that you can't have a fair justice system before everybody in the system is treated as equals. These two principles Rawls illustrates in his theory of justice gives rise to his veil of ignorance. The original position is a thought experiment in which individuals come together to decide on the principles of justice that will govern their society. In this thought experiment, individuals are imagined to be behind a veil of ignorance, which means they have no knowledge of their own personal characteristics, such as their race, gender, or social economic status. This veil of ignorance is meant to ensure that individuals make decisions based on fairness and justice, rather than self-interest. By putting themselves in the shoes of others, individuals are more likely to choose principles that are fair and just for all members of society. In his original position, individuals are free to propose and discuss different principles of justice, and they will eventually settle on the principles that they think are the most just. Rawls argued that under these conditions, individuals will choose his two principles of justice as they provide the fairest and most just outcome for all members of society. The veil of ignorance is a crucial component of this thought experiment, and it forces individuals to think about justice from a more objective perspective rather than from a self-interested one. By imagining themselves in the shoes of others, individuals can develop a great sense of empathy in understanding, and they can begin to see the world from a different perspective. Everybody's heard, don't judge someone till you walk a mile in their shoes. I think today John Rawls would expand that view of the veil of ignorance to include things like disability, behavioral problems, autism, bipolar, schizophrenia. We can even go as far as we got a big deal with the border crisis and immigrants stuff. What if you're born into a Mexico turmoil or a country and stuff to where you want to flee to another world, but they don't welcome you? Today's Rawls theory of justice remains highly relevant, offering a framework for thinking about justice and inequality in our own societies. By understanding his principle of justice and the thought experiment that underpins them, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of justice and the challenges of creating a more just society. So, is America a just and fair society? How much thought was put into the due process of law in our judicial concerning mental health, mental defect, medical defect, abuse, cult brainwashing? I'd love to hear what you think. Remember to like, subscribe, put your comments in the comment section below, and watch my other videos and theories and philosophers. Make sure you like, subscribe, click that bell notification for future videos, and I will see you on the next one.